Good morning to most, good afternoon to others. I am your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell as we're constantly adding new shows and doing cross streams with other channels. Usually this night is reserved for the less melanated members of the TIR family. But today, I will be taking over once again for the white guys and doing a show that is near and dear to my heart. And I think it's going to be a lot more relevant than a lot of people think. I want to start off by sending a massive shout out to all who watched the surprise birthday stream this past Saturday. I was truly surprised at everyone that showed up, and I'm so thankful for all the messages that I got on various social media platforms, and of course a lot of you sent personal messages as well. I'm always kind of blown away by the response that we get, good or bad, from the show. But Saturday was really special because I didn't see any of it coming. I abided by M. Toussaint and did not look on the bottom to see who was coming through. I got so many messages from people that couldn't make it to the show. So that was really cool. So thank you again, M. Toussaint. Thank you, Jordan, for making that happen. Also, for you listeners on the audio-only formats, Apple is rolling out a subscription service. So for our audio-only listeners, and I believe it's a little over 40% of the listens that we get, and we're approaching 1 million streams. We will hit 1 million downloaded streams, if not the end of this month, most likely the beginning of next month. You can get all the access to the Champagne Room by signing up to the Apple subscription service for This is Revolution Podcast. Also, I was shocked at how many people stole our name. I met some people on my birthday. I did leave the house for a little bit after the show. And there's a little cafe here in downtown Rosarito that I hang out at. And there was a family there, and they were from town, but the son spoke English and was a metalhead. And we got to talking. And his mom had asked, "What's the name of your show?" We told him we did a podcast, and I said, "This is Revolution Podcast." There was like 8 shows that tried to take our name. There's literally a show called This is the Revolution. I was like, who the hell do you think you are? Just kidding. But again, if you're an Apple Podcast listener and you want to have access to the Champagne Rooms, there's only one way. Sign up to the Apple subscription service. Otherwise, if you watch the show, there's only one way to have access to the Champagne Room. Also be a part of the live virtual audience for the Pascal Robert hosted Mau Mau Hour. And I should say, and I feel comfortable saying this is the internet. You can always go back and watch this. You don't have to watch it live. Pascal Robert will be on Katie Halper's show tonight. I believe he's on right now, as they will be playing a drinking game and discussing the RNC debate tonight. So it's a very interesting drinking game Katie has lined up. We are all honored here at TIR that Katie even thinks of our very, very small, fun show and thinks highly of Pascal and I. And, definitely Pascal is probably the best person to have on there to give very critical analysis of what's going on at the RNC. Now that we got all that out of the way, let me bring in one of the co-hosts for tonight. Derek Varn will be with us shortly. I saw some people asking in the chat, is Varn going to be with us? Yes, he will. He's finishing up a show on his channel. Can't tell you if it's live or not. I believe it's a pre-record. If I know C-licious Derek Varn, then it's probably some sort of pre-record. But this gentleman, Toussaint and I were kind of joking about this gentleman because he fills in for me when the crew gives me a day off, and the only thing I could think of is he's kind of a cross between Jay Leno and Arsenio. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember when Arsenio would fill in on the Tonight Show. Definitely, I'm sure people remember when Jay Leno would fill in on the Tonight Show. That's who this man is for me. I hope he doesn't take that offensively. It's just that's how highly I think of this gentleman, and I love his company. We got to hang out. Was it late last year, when he was out here in Los Angeles with his son? Please welcome Kenzo Shibata.
Hey, Jason. Happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sorry I wasn't able to make it.
Well, I'm shocked that all that did make it. I got tons of messages from those that weren't able to get in because we had limits to how many people could get in. Mm-hmm. There was a time issue that people got confused between East and West Coast time. So a whole bunch of craziness that I found out after the fact. But, you're here now.
And I'm very excited to talk about this topic. Very near and dear to my heart.
Oh, I know you are, because I don't even know how I jokingly said it. Maybe I shared something. We talked about it somehow on social media, because we always dick around and send each other insane things. If you are my friend, like my real friend, then you get really unsavory memes from me via social media.
And a lot of good nostalgia too.
Yes,
because you and I had like at least the same media childhood. So like anything you send me, like, yeah, I remember this.
And we had talked about it. Another friend was going to be on this show. He's also around our age. My good friend Pasquale Romero. Sadly, everybody got sick in his house, and he is a dad. So us dads know what that's like when the house is sick. So I'm still very confident in the crew that I have with me to talk about this. I was telling Kenzo off air that I had started reading a book called We Believe the Children, which is where I got the title from, of the show tonight, and a real interesting read. I'm probably going to quote a little bit from it later tonight, but to get us started, let's see. The Satanic Panic and the continued religious right culture war. Many people in my age cohort, Generation X, hear the term Satanic Panic and our ears perk up. A time we all remember for better or for worse. It was a time when America stopped trusting not only their neighbor, but started seeing evil in some of the most trusted individuals, child care providers. The McMartin trial and so many others like it were filled with terrifying tales of animal sacrifice, child sexual assault, demonic sightings, and more. When we hear some of the confessions now from that era, we often scoff. But it was serious business. The moral majority was at war with what was left of the New Deal and Great Society Democrats and their liberal ilk. Reagan, heavy metal, horror movies, an increase of women in the workforce, and child abductions all equated one massive phenomenon, the Satanic Panic. Kenzo, what was that moment like for you? Because again, like you said, we're both of the same age. I think I'm only a year older than you.
I'm 44.
I'm 2 years older than you. Motherfuck you for being you. Did your parents ever accuse you of being victimized by a teacher or a babysitter? Or did any place you ever go to get investigated? Or were you ever accused of being a devil worshiper for the music that you listen to? I can honestly say both of those things happened to me.
Well, yeah, I just remember the Satanic Panic, particularly like that, the time of that era. We were in a moral panic about there was the missing children in general, like when the TV movie Adam came out.
Yeah.
Everyone was terrified because of that. Still, for like the remainder of the decade, we were allowed to play in the streets by ourselves. The whole helicopter parenting thing didn't start till much, much later. Interestingly enough, after all these things were debunked,
Mhm.
really, and then of course, like I kind of came politically
Mhm.
around this time, came up politically because, the PMRC was on the news and, they were
You gonna
talking
tell
about,
people a little bit about the
yeah,
PMRC?
the Parents Music Resource Center was a group of Washington wives, led by Tipper Gore,
Mhm.
and Jim Baker's wife, I forget her name, and, it was bipartisan, like all things that are made to destroy anything good in the world. It was a bipartisan, committee, and, they, started this public awareness campaign about the evils of rock music at the time, and they had this list of the 15 worst offenders of music, so they called that the Filthy 15, and they, pushed to get these, warning labels put on records that were deemed offensive to them. And, lo and behold, if you peel back what was going on there too, is like they actually struck up a deal with the Recording Association of America, the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, to work with their husbands to basically lobby their husbands to get, a tax put on recording like blank tapes because at that time, this was long before MP3s.
Mhm.
The recording industry was, scared shitless of people taping their records. And, through that, they were able to push the record industry to voluntarily sticker their own records. So they got to win. Everyone got a win out of it. And unfortunately, when it seemed innocuous putting a sticker on a record, but what that meant was if you lived in Mobile, Alabama, your record store isn't going to carry that because your record store is probably Walmart, and Walmart had a policy of not carrying those records or carrying alternative versions. So to all of this led to censorship at the end of the day. And all of this fed into the Satanic Panic, because one of the categories they had for offensive music was occult/Satanism, where they said that Wasp, the band Wasp, was going to turn your children into sex depraved Satan worshippers.
Now you're
And
gonna tell me Wasp didn't make you wanna drink incessantly in a pool with your mom watching, Decline of
while
a
you're
West
in front of your
Decline of a
mother
Western
shaking her
Civilization?
head.
That to this day,
Mhm.
one of my favorite movies
Absolutely.
to this day. There's no scene to me in cinema history that can define a moment more than Chris Holmes drunk in that pool.
Mhm.
Chris, why do you drink? I drink because you wanna say why I drink?
And then, in the same movie, you have these young, um, Sunset Strip bands, talking about how they can't wait to live that
Oh,
Chris Holmes lifestyle. And you see
yes.
Chris Holmes, all he's doing is drinking in front of his mom in his pool. Like he's got all the money in the world, but he's just a miserable fuck.
He did and he didn't. That's what's so funny, right?
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, there was a short time that Chris Holmes followed my band Bitter Lake on social media.
Oh, nice.
I don't we don't have any friends in common that I know.
Mhm.
Um, I am not anti Chris Holmes because Chris Holmes, I don't know if you follow his life. He looks like the type of person that would have stormed the Capitol
Mhm.
on January 6th. He kind of sounds like it to a certain extent. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness. Derek Varn.
I just stormed the Capitol. All right.
He's
Hello.
gone full Mennonite with that beard. You got to move out of Utah, man. It's effing with you. It's not right. Don't be rebellious and drink that Coke free.
What I should do is completely shave the mustache and then shave that strip right here. Go completely Mennonite. Mennonite or heavy metal musician? This is the question.
You decide.
Vice had to have done a documentary on Mennonite metal at one point. It didn't exist. They put together a band for their documentary.
Exactly. They totally created it. But Chris Holmes actually is he lives in France, and he had a terminal. He had some really bad cancer. I think it was in his throat. And because of the medical system in France, the free healthcare, he was able to see a doctor and get chemo and get treatment. And I believe he's better. And he is a huge proponent now of socialized medicine and socialized public goods altogether, and doesn't understand why people still want to live in America. So definitely, if you are a fan of Decline of Western Civilization, follow Chris Holmes on social media. He is a hoot, to say the least.
But that was also one of the things that kind of showed the Emperor had no clothes. Was I was into this music so much, and like Wasp wasn't even a band I was so into until the controversy, and then I checked them out. I'm like, are you serious? This is the band that's going to turn me into like a murderous, Satanist?
F like a beast, dude.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't quite hair metal, but they were, they were kind of on the line there. I mean, they definitely were, F like a beast was definitely harder than on Skinny Bop, but similar specs and sleaze kind of rock. I'm like, they're all right, but they're not gonna, turn me evil.
Yeah, I remember when people tried to convince me that like Poison was satanic. It was, I mean, all that damn Yankees. I mean, like Jesus. Ted Nugent will break your brain, but Satanism is not why.
See, Ted Nugent is a pedophile.
like that's who you don't want your kid to be around, is Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent took a liking to our daughter.
And he's gonna, ask for custody so he could take her on tour next.
He totally did that. Everything Kenzo is saying is entirely true.
I know Ted Nugent is basically Metal's Woody Allen,
but not as clever.
No, he is not. No, I mean, Kenzo, the Satanic Panic stuff, how long did it last for where you were at? I don't know where you grew up, so
Chicago area. I would say it existed throughout maybe even the early 90s. Although there was a resurgence when Marilyn Manson got big, like in the mid to late 90s. So it was pretty consistent throughout the 80s and 90s. It definitely hit like a fevered pitch in the late 80s, but then there was, the area where I grew up was very Catholic too. So, one of the things I do remember is like when my friends and I all got into metal, and I being like, a Jewish atheist Buddhist kid, they were afraid to have Slayer records at their house because they're like, oh my God, there's a pentagram in my house. What if I go to hell for this? And I'm just laughing. I'm like, there's no hell. Who cares? This is fun music. And they're like, you don't understand, Kenzo. I'm like, there's no hell. So I think that
the guy with the pitchfork was going to get him.
I mean, Buddhist hell is cooler than that. But like it's both more intense, but not forever. Which it's funny because we are I guess on different ends of the United States, and also my father was when I was a kid, he was a Jew boo. He later became some kind of stupid Joel Osteen Christian, but like he is ethnically Jewish, as I guess so we share that weird tendency. And my confrontation with the Satanic Panic wasn't my parents. My mother was a vaguely, I don't know, like the 70s and 80s were weird. So she was like a vaguely Wiccan Catholic who was at one point actually briefly Jewish. That's why I was halakhically Jewish. A whole complicated thing. Not going to go into that. It's really, really a lot. But so she always thought it was ridiculous. But I was like practicing Hebrew when I first came back to Georgia after leaving for a little while to stay with my father. And and one of my middle school teachers in a public school in right outside of Macon picked up the paper and then accused me of being a witch, and called my mother in that evening to have a discussion about whether or not I was a Satanist, which, technically speaking, they can't do that anyway. Like, even if I was a Satanist, they couldn't say anything about it. But that happened when I was 14. So I guess it was 1993. I was into heavy metal and rap and D&D, which, is like the trifecta of evil. So there you go. And I guess the Satanic Panic stuff where I was at never went away. Like I loaned a friend around the same time period when I was in middle school. I loaned a friend, I guess I was in 8th grade, my mom's Anne Rice books, right? Because I was really into them. 8th grade goth kid, you know how it goes.
Oh yeah.
And her Pentecostal parents burned them. So when people talk about book burnings and stuff in America, I was like, dude, I went to school with people, like, I was part of the local metal and punk scene, and every now and then one of my friends would find Jesus, and they would go to this thing outside of the church and burn all their records and most of their books. So yeah. And even my mom, like I just said, my mom was one of these quasi magic flirty Catholics who was, not quite last, but not a heretic. And but she had Michelle Remembers in the house. Ooh. Which is like one of the books that started all this shit off.
That's kind of like maybe the groundwork for all the stuff that we're talking about. Did any of you guys stay at a daycare place or have a school that was involved with anything?
Well, there was definitely child sexual abuse happening in my town. There was a teacher, there was an ice cream man, there was like an older kid in the neighborhood, none of whom were into metal, none of whom were Satanists. So like there, just like how moral panics really work. There's like so much dust blown up and so much confusion, but like the actual kernel of truth that maybe is in there is completely obfuscated through all that.
Yeah, we had several child sex predator panics that were very much based on reality. I mean, and up so and including when I was 16 years old, like 2 kids I knew from class broke into a friend of mine who was, I guess, a freshman in college's house, killed her whole family, raped and killed her too. And there was lots of discussion about how those kids were Satanists, but they weren't at all. They were just, in fact, I believe those kids went to the local Baptist church. So it was definitely in the air at the time. And this would have been the early mid 90s. I think we're all close to being too old together. So, but I do remember like the 700 Club being on at people's houses all the time. I remember Vacation Bible School and then encouraging you to bring all your secular CDs because they were probably satanic and backmasking, and to purge them, to throw them away and go buy like Striper and DC Talk and the Newsboys. And like that was very real. And as a religious outsider, it got so bad that my mother actually told me to like pretend to be a Baptist, to go to a Baptist church, but not to convert, so that people would leave us alone. So I think it was pretty intense. And I remember I'm in the deep South, but I think it's good to like compare and contrast, because people think it was like only in rural areas and suburbia, and I don't think that's true at all. Nor was it purely a white phenomenon, although it definitely was more so. But I do remember going to some black churches where they were really hammering down that D&D was a product of demons. So it was very much all over the air at the time. As for the the story about the story about how we got to the like the nursing, not nursing school, the daycare panics is interesting because the actual history of that and its confluence, it's kind of the worst of all worlds as far as like how this happened. There was all this well-meaning attempt in the 70s and early 80s to kind of to treat child molestation in the family as a medical issue. All right. And this was really pushed, particularly in California. And it was also pushed at the same time by the same people to believe child victims. And you had this whole move towards the therapeutic in the 70s. These three things together really did lay the groundwork, because you had therapists who were without even realizing it, were fishing. And then that Michelle Remembers book comes out. You have all this recovered memory therapy tied into it. So you had this very sort of, and it was later on exposed, tied into Catholic stuff. Like the author was very Catholic. It was basically a kind of like mission push. But you had that. You had also in the culture at the time, The Exorcist, the Amityville Horror, that whole, the Amityville Horror is supposed to be a true story. And that,
as is The Exorcist supposed to be a true story as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. William Peter Blatty at least claims the first one is based off a true story. So you have all these things kind of coming together. And then you have this kind of great awakening of like really fundamental evangelical Protestantism spreading throughout the late 70s and the 80s. It really has roots going all the way back to the late 60s. One of the things that we always misread the baby boomers on is we all think that they were the new left. The new left was probably 5% of the baby boomers of that age. Like, it was tiny. And I think Rick Perlstein's Nixonland's very good on this, and actually giving you the demographics and all that on who those people really were. But there was this very strong evangelical movement. And I think we forget how much money these people had. Like, the 700 Club had like satellites at a time where that was beyond the purview of some states.
I mean, some of these people had
Yeah.
amusement parks. Let's be real here about the amount of money, regardless if it was nefarious the way they got their ill-gotten gains, the amount they were able to generate. Because you're from Georgia, so you remember that park that the Bakers had.
Oh yeah.
Massive amount of money they were accumulating. I mean, they make so much money that they can really make a stink in the political arena. Ronald Reagan was no massive Christian.
I mean, this was the thing. Like, I guess we have a little bit of a recurrence of it now with the recurrence of Christian nationalism, because Christian nationalism is an easier sell in a multi-ethnic country than white nationalism is, let's be honest. But in general, you have these fears of evangelicals coming out. But in the 80s and 90s, the evangelicals really were a huge portion of the population. And that was a new thing. I mean, it wasn't that we weren't really Christian as a country like from forever, since like, the 1810s or whatever. But the mainline Protestant denominations, as they became more influenced by liberal Protestantism, they lost a lot of their congregational base. And it went until about 2007. All those people went, to the most part, either out of religion altogether, but that was rare, are into more extreme forms of evangelical, Pentecostal, fundamentalist Christianity. Um, and in my area, like you had the Southern Baptists, and they were they were not as scary as certain other groups. Like we had Primitive Baptist, we had snake handlers, we had all kinds of stuff. Like I remember a Pentecostal friend of mine at school who I knew from the punk scene who again refound her Jesus, would coming up to me in the middle of the hall and trying to exorcise me.
Did you have the
So
Mennonite beard at the time?
No, I did not.
I think, you've mentioned Michelle Remembers a few times. For people that don't know, that is a book written by a psychologist who has a patient who says that she was tortured by her mother and brought to a Satanist, where that she was victim of all kinds of weird sacrifices and rituals. And there was a person named Malachi, or a demon named Malachi. It's a crazy story. What the author does leave out of this insane story is that he ended up falling in love with the patient, which is a big no-no in therapy, and ended up marrying her. And that book, to Derek's point, does kind of lay the groundwork for a satanic panic. Another name that we haven't really touched on is Anton LaVey, which I'm sure we're going to talk about him a little bit more. I do want to ask this question before we get to LaVey. Some people put the roots of the rise in the satanic panic in a change in societal norms. With more women in the workplace, there was more trust put onto daycare providers and teachers for child rearing. An early bill that passed both houses in the early 70s to provide free childcare was shot down by Richard Nixon because he felt it was too communist in nature. Was part of this fear we saw a tool used by the religious right to get women out of the workplace, or I should say as a response to women in the workplace, and trying to pivot them back to the home?
I think so, but it didn't work. I mean, because like many things with the right, when they try to posit a cultural answer to something, like they're not dealing with any of the underlying economic reasons that people were going into the workplace in the first place. It wasn't like, yes, people were doing it because of the Betty Friedan problem if you were of a certain income bracket, but that wasn't why poor women had ever entered the workplace. So there's I think the amount of social control there was that. I also think it was a good recruitment tool, and I think we underestimate how much it worked for a long time. I mean, like, it seemed like, and somebody was mentioned George Bush was the last person who really gave lip service to the evangelical movement. Trump, it's ironic because now the evangelical movement is more Republican than it's ever been, but the Republicans don't have to pay lip service to them anymore because it's basically self-selected. Most everybody else has left. If you look at the stats of what is it, millennials and younger, if you're under 35, you're only like, your chance of being religious of any variety is a quarter flip, right? And of the variety that's 50%, less and less of it is evangelical Christian. In fact, Protestant Christians lost their majority in the religious landscape in the United States, I think in like 2004. So, the largest singular religious group is Catholic. After that, it's, I guess it's all Protestant Christians together. But we all know that like Protestants are like Trotskyists, they'll split over anything. So, and I think that's been an interesting trend. And one of the things that I pointed out when we talk about like Christian nationalism now, the reason why it's obvious now is because it's no longer the default assumption. Like, it really kind of was when I was a kid. Like, these people could do things that were blatantly illegal. Like I mentioned, the calling me into the office in a public school. to talk about whether or not I was a Satanist, which again, even if I was, is a protected religious category in the United States. Um, and they felt no problem doing this, right? No one got in any trouble for doing that. It wasn't, my parents laughed it off. They thought it was stupid. They made fun of my teachers, but that was the end of it. Later on, when I was doing zines in high school, I got in trouble for writing an article or publishing an article by a teenage girl on Wicca. I didn't even write it. And I didn't publish it in the school newspaper. It was a completely outside of school thing. We didn't distribute it on campus. It just found its way there.
You thought you were
Now,
Christian Slater and pump up the volume, didn't you?
So I think this is really, really interesting. And there's some other things to notice. So if you meet reactionaries now, like religious reactionaries now, they're more likely to be either Orthodox Christians or Catholics, not because there aren't still plenty of reactionary evangelicals, but they don't produce intellectuals anymore, really. And in the 80s, they still did. And their leaders, their thought leaders, even the smart ones, were on the satanic panic kick. And I think that's something that we forget. It'd be like if Concordia Seminary, which probably did really do this, honestly, was also pushing satanic panic stuff, as well as, your local conspiracy theorist, your proto Alex Jones, etc. And, that was very much going on too. I mean, the beginnings of that milieu that we would think of as the proto QAnon milieu, the stuff that comes out of a lot of the paranoia of the 80s and 90s, and the, this mixture of former rightists who were tied to white nationalist or Christian nationalist groups running into apocalyptic cults. That was also pretty, it was in the air in the culture when we were growing up.
It still was there. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, apocalyptic cults are still in existence. I mean, David Koresh is 1993. And there's definitely other cults that existed. They didn't have the ATF come in there because they didn't have guns. They mostly used, sexual coercion. But they definitely existed. Kenzo, I would love to hear your take on this pivot, the societal pivot that's happening during the 80s, where you have more women in the workplace. You have a rise in Christian right-wing fundamentalism. And you have a lot more trust in daycare providers. I know schools are different. I feel like when I was in school way back when, many moon ago, there were after-school programs were just the norm in public schools that I went to in California. And those go by the wayside. You know this. You two are both educators, and you guys probably know this better than me. Was part of that budgetary? Was part of it, because there were cases of kids saying they got touched, and the district was like, we can't afford this, and the lawsuits. And what do you think about the rise of women in the workplace and this kind of almost an assault on women going back to work that we see with the satanic panic?
Well, I definitely think they, the people pushing the satanic panic were taking advantage of the fear that a lot of folks had, having to, I went to daycare, I remember in the 80s, and my mom didn't have to do that for my older sisters. It was definitely a big thing. I saw daycare centers opening up in droves at that point. And so if you really wanted to put fear in people's hearts, because economically we had, folks had to do that, families had to have, if there were two parents there, both of them had to work. Single parent families, the parent had to work, which was exacerbated in the 90s when Clinton passed welfare to work, which, when you traditionally had some mothers particularly so single mothers staying at home with the children, they had to go to work to receive any kind of benefits at that point. It was something that was a real fear that people had. So I'm not exactly sure if the goal of the people pushing the satanic panic was to force women back in, but they definitely saw opportunity in playing on that fear. And then when you look at the McMartin case, where there was absolutely no child sexual assault or Satanism happening there, that was something that was suggested by the caseworkers that were interviewing the kids. I just feel like it was just a perfect storm at that point, but I don't know if that was necessarily the goal.
And when we talk about the McMartin trial, the most expensive trial in California history, lasted 10 years. Also, there's laws that are passed around this time that, there's a law that says or is it an amendment, I believe, where you have to face your accuser, or you have to look the person you're accusing in the face in trial, or I forget the wording of it. I'm saying it wrong. I apologize. And that goes away for children because they don't want to traumatize children.
Mm-hmm.
So during the McMartin trial, a lot of kids are testifying either with their backs to the Bucky family, or via closed circuit television. And I was actually reading some of the transcripts from the questioning of the children, not in court, but with the quote unquote therapist. And keep in mind, it was a person that didn't have training in certain realms of child psychology. And they would just take out a doll and be like, hey, your friends all said that these teachers touched the doll and touched you too. So where did they touch you? And the kids would be like, it didn't happen. And they would just keep doing it. And the kids were finally like, okay, fine, it happened. And like, well, tell us about the secret place. Well, I don't know about the secret place. Come on, you're not stupid. They were like, come on, you're not stupid. Where's the secret place? At the corner store. There was a basement, and they sacrificed a virgin. The best one I heard was that they flushed a bull or a donkey down the toilet.
Which is totally something a child would fantasize.
Yeah. But why did you believe it?
So I think the context of this is actually super important with the McMartin case, but there's something that I've been thinking about a lot. The sexualization of children really was becoming more publicly seen in the 70s and 80s. I mean, think about, and I don't just mean in like the satanic context.
Oh no,
like
Brooke Shields did a lot of
exactly
as a child.
Yeah, there's two movies that I saw of Brooke Shields that you can't easily get anymore because she was doing nude scenes as a 13-year-old. And one of those movies is other than this scene, it's a good movie, but it is about a child, a young girl first in the prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in a larger culture, completely on top of the entering of women into the workplace. There's an economic story behind that. It's the stagnant, like the end of the family wage system. We don't talk about that much anymore. We talk about like second wave feminism in terms of Betty Friedan, but we often don't remember that also, like, well, there was massive inflation and wages were stagnating, and the only way that people could maintain the households, and even in the kind of beginnings of the end of the middle class, was for women to go to work.
Well, second wave feminism really brings about this whole need to protect children, because we start talking about victimization. We start talking about listening to victims for the first time and looking at child abuse differently. I think we kind of believe that there was always people that were anti-child abuse for a long time. Child abuse just it didn't even exist until someone was like, I think this is wrong that we treat children this way. We were nicer to animals before we even started to think to be nice to children. So the victims' rights movement is a major player in this idea of protecting innocence, and I think we can't
Right.
forget that.
I mean, basically, while like, yes, even in colonial America, incest was illegal, but there was a general attitude and even enshrined into law, just like, I mean, and this is a good point to tie it into second wave feminism. It's just like spousal rape.
Mhm.
Well, before
Mhm.
the 80s in most states, there's no such thing as spousal rape. And before you start seeing, I think it really starts in the 50s, but it really doesn't take off into the 70s. There's really no like, you know, anything but a social imperator on you know, how we treated children, like whether or not you could beat them as long as you didn't kill them. There were no mandatory reporters either. Like, I think those laws really start in the 70s and really expand in the 80s and 90s. So, you know, even if I knew about it, but for social cohesiveness, I wouldn't talk about it, which is why we can't really compare child abuse rates between different periods of American culture until the 70s, because
We don't talk
we
about
got
it.
no
We
idea.
don't
We don't have
we look at
stats.
we look at things like, and this is a great point, Varn. We look at things like hysteria. We're trying to figure out at this moment, like what causes hysteria, right? And
Mhm.
when you bring up what is it? Remembers Who Remembers? Melanie Remembers. The book that predates Melanie Remembers is a book that was very popular that people may know, the movie, and Sally Field's portrayal as a Sybil. The Sally Field Sybil.
Mhm.
And where Sybil has nothing to do with Satanism. After the success of Michelle Remembers, people then go look at Sybil and look at the treatment of her mother, the way her mother treated her abusively, as the reason for her hysteria or her multiple personality disorder. And we're starting to look at these things as a society a lot differently. And Sybil and Michelle Remembers, and it's funny talking about books, because, you know, when was the last time anybody talked about a book having influence? But, you know, we're talking about the 50s and then the 70s. But these books have kind of profound influence on the way we're looking at this thing that we don't really talk about, to the point that media starts coming out about treatment in the home and possible abuse. And this is also a time where this boomer generation, I mean, let's reference some pop culture, Forrest Gump, right?
Mhm.
Jenny remembers being abused and she throws the rocks at her house, remember?
Yeah.
And that is important in that movie, because that's also a time for a lot of people of that generation to come to terms with abuse that they suffered. Roseanne Barr has therapy and finds out that she was molested and didn't know about it. This is common, and it's also the downside of that. And we also saw this with the Satanic Panic, is memories start to get implanted into the heads of children and adults.
Yeah, because recovered memory theory was basically hypnosis, and that opens you up to suggestion. I mean, like that's how hypnosis works. It doesn't unlock things; it makes you really susceptible to being, to being led. And yes, you still have some will in that. It's not like it doesn't just completely turn it off, as anyone's ever dealt with a stage hypnosis will know. But you don't. Your will is greatly reduced. It's interesting we talk about this narrative, and I've never really thought about it till right now. A whole lot of the initial film around this conflict is waking up to women's issues were actually caged in kind of thriller movies that often had satanic imagery. Think about Rosemary's Baby, which is
Yes.
about like spousal abuse, and it's a
Yes.
protest against spousal abuse, right? But it's also caged up in this like Roger Corman satanic movie, and it gives you a narrative for all this. Like, and one of the things that I've been really fascinated by conspiracy culture is how much conspiracy narratives are like explicitly prefabricated from popular media, not just in the books that we're talking about, but also like the movies, you know. I think The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, and Amityville Horror play just as much a part of setting the narrative groundwork and the framing for how these things can come together. Because those narratives, by the time you get to the 80s, have been in the general culture now for almost 20 years. But that, you know, they're understood to be mostly fictional. I mean, with the exception of, we talk about The Exorcist was not supposed to be fictional, right? But I guess neither was Amityville Horror. But they start off as fictional and get less and less and less presented as less and less and less so. And that's very dominant in the culture. I think it's interesting, you know, just from a cultural critic perspective, if we look at when those movies came back in the popularity, it was like in the middle end of the Bush administration where you start seeing these Exorcist movies come back. And, you know, The Exorcism of Emily Rose and other such movies. But it's interesting to me that I don't think you can separate all these things out. They all come together. What's funny also is you have a moral panic initially actually on the liberal left about song lyrics and music culture, and all this slams together in 1985, because it wasn't the Reagan administration that was leading the charge against satanic music and sexual imagery in music. It was Tipper Gore,
Al Gore's wife.
Yeah,
the guy that created the internet, right?
Right.
I mean, Kinzo, we also talk about horror movies. You also grew up with horror movies. In the 80s, we have this magical time for people of our age, where we have music television that's 24 hours, that's giving us visuals to this crazy music. So we can watch Motley Crue Looks That Kill. We can watch Megadeth Wake Up Dead video. We can watch all these crazy, you know, we can watch Iron Maiden Number of the Beast video, right? Judas Priest. We get the imagery of evil.
Mm-hmm.
The horns, Holy Diver. There's so many. At the same time, we get the expansion of home video recording.
Yep.
And the ability to make cheap horror movies, which were already cheap by Hollywood standards. Now we can get even cheaper horror movies. And because of, you know, capitalist production of the 80s,
Full Moon Pictures exist, right?
you get Full Moon. You get Roger Corman's company. I think it was the World Pictures. I forget.
Yeah.
You get
Video.
You get New Line. You get the blow up of
New
New
Line.
Line, which gives us Nightmare on Elm Street. In our lifetime, we get the new Universal monsters, right? There's these monsters: Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon. They're dwarfed by the time we come to be, because we now have Freddy, Michael Myers, and Jason Voorhees.
And they're all interested in youth and teenagers too, in a way the Universal monsters aren't. Right? The Universal monsters are very much, I mean, yes, they're coded because a lot of them are post-Hays Code, but like, and yes, they're probably aimed at younger people. And I know I saw them late at night as a kid because they were always on fucking TV, but because they're weighted G. But it's like if you look at from, I guess, from Halloween and the beginnings of the slasher to Nightmare on Elm Street and all these you know new monster movies, even what Monster Squad, right, which is about the Universal horror movies, but they're aimed at kids and young adults too. And so and a lot of them do involve, like, I mean, you know, infamously Nightmare on Elm Street is about sexual violence and revenge, like so all this is like everywhere in the culture, right? And I don't think the reason why I pointed out is, if we want to say this was just a like a evangelical phenomenon, we have to ignore the fact that, like, it actually is directly tied in the second wave feminism as how it got at narratives. It actually is tied into the change in childcare situations. And I also think it is now, like, this current groomer panic is about that, because we've all been reminded how much power during COVID, since we don't have any other form of childcare for most people, the schools actually have. Like, there's a reason why this is happening now, and people were able to capitalize on it. And yes, it is highly reactionary and highly right-wing, but I don't think it actually starts there alone.
This is a great comment. Don't forget Dracula was a groomer. That's pretty funny. That's actually pretty funny. I do want to. We've gone already an hour. Do I have you guys for a little bit longer?
Sure.
Maybe a little longer, yeah.
Okay. I know. You got dad shit to do over there. I know there's like homework or some. There's some dad oriented task that I'm sure you have to do right now.
I've already sacrificed my children.
I have to ask this question because we've kind of danced around it, and I got a quote here and I want to read it. Was Anton LaVey the perfect tool for the right? From the book We Believe the Children. In 1966, a San Francisco musician and entertainment world social butterfly named Anton LaVey founded a new religious sect based on pseudo-Nietzschean principles of individualism, hedonism, and Epicureanism. He called it the Church of Satan. LaVey, who had been born with the name Howard LaVey, had extraordinary showbiz instincts, and in Satanism's early years, he used these to turn his church into a media phenomenon. He published the Satanic Bible in 1969, following it with a companion guide to religious practice, the Satanic Rituals, and a how-to seduction guide for women, The Complete Witch. He used nude women as altars, and he televised both a satanic baptism and a satanic wedding. LaVey's combination of media savvy and anti-Christian provocation was attractive to those who took him seriously and absolutely irresistible to those who did not. Hollywood took up Satanism in 1968 with Rosemary's Baby, and then again with The Exorcist in 1973. Satanism also became a regular feature of evangelical cautionary tales about the dangers of pleasure-seeking life. Fellas, Anton LaVey, is he a clown?
I mean, he's a clown. I mean, he was literally a clown at one point in his life. I mean, it's funny when you say, is he a gift for the right? I'm like, yeah, but he's also a right winger. Like, he's basically Nietzsche plus Ayn Rand plus stupid. like, I mean, one of the things about all this satanic stuff is, like, as a kid, it has such mystique. So of course I was actually interested in it, because after I've been accused of being a Satanist, I was like, well, what is this about? And so I get my Satanic Bible from Barnes and Nobles, which tells you how dangerous it actually is. And I read it and I'm like, and I'd also been made to read Ayn Rand in school. That's another thing we could talk about on another
You were
day.
like, that was the teacher gave it to you?
Oh no, so one of the ironies about the Objectivist Society is they will give out Ayn Rand books for free.
Yeah.
Okay, so wasn't the teacher was like, here's the Fountainhead.
Yeah, so they would
You ever get those in your teacher's mailbox, like a little order form?
Yeah, totally, with the essay about, can you have it? And I'd be like, no,
yes,
drop. But my school, of course, because they took advantage of these things from the Objectivist Society, had like 8,000 copies of the Fountainhead. So I had already been exposed to it by the time I hit Anton LaVey, and I just remember reading it. And I'd also read Nietzsche because I was bored once, and I just remember reading it. I'm like, oh, this is just like really edgy Ayn Rand, basically, with like more sex and magic, but it doesn't really tell you how to do the magic. It's like, oh, you can work your will. And I think this did lead to like weird things in the 90s. There was this whole, I used to follow Feral House Press, which is full of crypto fascists. It's a very fun thing to follow back in the day, but it was also full of interesting, weird musicians and stuff. But there was tons of this, stuff from Anton LaVey, because then the Church of Satan was real, and then you actually started getting stranger and stranger successors to him. People like Boyd Rice, who was the Sethian Church, which actually literally believed in Satan, as opposed to the other Church of Satan, which is just a protest group. Like, there became like this whole like we are theist Satanist, and we really believe Satan is the god of the universe. Versus it was crazy. So in a weird way, there's a feedback loop where the evangelicals, where the thing that they were fighting became more and more real the longer they fought it, but it never had any power. It was just now there were actually Satanists in the world, as opposed to before where you just made that shit up. So
Kenzo, what say you about Anton LaVey?
Anton LaVey is a nice Jewish boy from Chicago, so I got that in common with him. Like literally, his name was Howard Levy, right? And
yeah, Howard Levy.
but yeah, I mean, he was
Howard.
way more a P.T. Barnum than an Aleister Crowley. Like
Oh, yeah.
he, you know, you saw. I remember seeing interviews with both him and like other members of the Church of Satan on like Geraldo and all those other trash talk shows, and like they would literally just say, "Oh, we call ourselves Satanists because it's the opposite of Christianity." You know, we believe in seeking pleasure because it's the opposite of Christianity. And then, you know, like Barn, I also bought a copy of the Satanic Bible, probably at a Barnes and Noble or a Borders bookstore or something like that. And it is kind of copy and paste. Like so much of it is just, oh, here's a pagan word. I could say, here's a list of, you know, one page is just a list of different names for Satan. Like it really is just a hodge. It's almost an anarchist cookbook for Satanists.
Yeah, it really is. Which means also it'll blow you up if you try to do it. But
maybe blow you up figuratively, like you'll blow up as a megastar because you're the hot Satanist podcaster.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is interesting, like in the late '90s, how much this becomes an actual subculture. I do think we need to like be kind of honest about that, because it really isn't before Anton LaVey. And then later on, I mean, eventually there is a way that you trace Anton LaVey to the Church of the Nine Angles, right? Which is like, you know, a real fascist Satanist death cult. Not one that has a lot of followers, because, you know, actual death cults don't tend to really attract people all that often.
It's like conflating Venom with Burzum.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or as I was about to say, conflating poison with Gargaroth.
Satan. That's still the greatest interview of all time. So what is your inspiration for this music? Satan.
God, I remember hearing as a kid how satanic Alice Cooper was. You can imagine how disappointed I was when I actually listened to him.
You hear him talk, you're like, really?
He's an avid golfer.
Can you imagine if we had like Alice Cooper and Iggy Pop all in the same room, just not being evil, talking about being right? That's my dream show, getting like Alice Cooper, getting all these people that are supposed to be evil and just get them on talking about how clean their lives are.
I mean, it's interesting to compare, like, if you mean LaVey, like, it's interesting how like actually scary Satanists before him are not part of this image. So, like, you don't, for example, have a whole lot of people in the 80s and 70s looking up who Jack Parsons was, like, you know, and he actually worked for the fucking government and
created rocket fuel, right?
Right, yeah, but was a Crowleyite.
Mm-hmm.
Scientology, interestingly, comes directly out of that, because Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard knew each other. So, like, there is an occult subculture in America before LaVey, but like, it's not what's scaring people. Interestingly, also, to tie this into like something like D&D. D&D is scaring the shit out of people, but I was playing like Call of Cthulhu and no one said a damn thing. Like, you know, or you could play, what was another one you could play? Elric. You could play the Elric game, which literally does have demon spells in it. Or when Vampire the Masquerade blew up, again, actual demons in the game.
Isn't that what you sometimes Blade on?
Yes. Blade is like a mixture of Marvel Comics and
Vampire the Masquerade.
Vampire the Masquerade.
It's funny that
Vampire also, there's LARPing, so like you dress up like vampires and run around the neighborhood.
But yeah, I mean, I did it as a teenager because it was a way to stay busy and not do drugs. You know, it was a thing, right? But what was interesting is, like, parents didn't freak out nearly as much about that. But I'm gonna say that the Satanic Panic stuff hadn't gone away either. Like, because you had all that Marilyn Manson fear, you had all that up through, and I mean, I think Columbine was my senior year of high school. I mean, one of the things that, and I actually talk about liberals with this a little bit. Liberals pretend that school shootings started in the late 90s. They completely ignore that until recently, the highest period of school shootings was actually in the 80s.
Oh, I hate Mondays.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
But they weren't random. That's the thing. They weren't like random school shootings. They were usually tied into gang violence. But I mean, like it's something that people don't think about, right? We've had several of these moral panics where, and I think liberals contribute to this. There's a feedback loop here. You know, I think it's interesting how many things that come out of almost like center liberal moral panics are tied into QAnon, for example. Like, and you know, someone like Anton LaVey is a gift for that because you have someone on the news. I mean, we think about this. How many fucking times was Anton LaVey on either Ronaldo or Donahue?
Oh, dude.
I don't.
He was a
Or was he
staple.
on Oprah?
I don't remember him
maybe
on
Ricky
Oprah,
Lake.
but that stuff was like a staple on my, trash daytime TV watching as a young person. I was one of those kids that could tell you what time it is by what was on television. And I would consume all of the trash TV with like, so between Club Kids and Satanism, I was like, if those two things were going on, and then if you top it off with like a racism show on Morton Downey that night, that was like a perfect, trifecta.
Yeah, well, to spread a subculture very quickly before the internet, that was what you had to do. You had to find a way to get on one of those shows. Like Gigi Allen was a regular on those, Anton LaVey, and then they had kind of a revolving cast of musicians that would do the rounds, like Jello Biafra, Mike Muir from Suicidal Tendencies,
Ice-T.
Yeah,
he was on with
Ice-T.
Cornel West.
Knew the media better than anyone else. Still,
yeah. I mean, it is interesting when I think about the melange of weird stuff I was exposed to in the 90s. Like I was exposed to radical literature because a lot of it was on the back of a Rage Against the Machine album. But that was a weird album. It had both Christopher Lash on the back as well as like Angela Davis and like stuff by Shining Path. It was strange.
Can we just admit that those guys were products of a left that was all over the place and kind of in the shadows?
Absolutely.
They were pretty young, and
they were dilettantes, like in the left. I mean, like
I look at them like they're kind of what I see now and what I see with them. To me, there's like a straight line between what Rage Against the Machine was doing in 1994 and what I see people that are new to the left doing now. It's like anything with a hammer and sickle is good. Shining Path, I'm all about it.
Yeah, it was uncredited. I mean, I do remember them a lot. Like just said that melange of books on the back of the thing. I'm like, did you guys even read them? And then when you actually listen, when Tom Morello became like a media figure in the aughts, it was surprising how milquetoast his politics was. Like I was like surprised. It's like, oh, he's just a progressive. Like, I was Zach De La Rocca actually the radical, or was nobody actually?
He ended up quitting the band. I don't know. I mean, the bigger question about that, and I don't know those cats personally, but I think when you can exist for that many years and have that level of communist iconography and have people like Paul Ryan be like, I had no idea what you were talking about. Either Paul Ryan is the biggest idiot of all time, or maybe you just weren't as communist in your lyrics as people would like to believe. It wasn't like there was hidden in the subtext.
What they were, their music was very groovy and anyone could get into it. I remember a lot of jocks who didn't give a shit about politics in my high school were totally into it. Like with the amount of records they sold, could not have just been selling to leftists. And the amount of records they sold, there's no way everyone who picked up a record,
particularly in like 1994 to 1999, when I'm like, well, yeah, what left was there? I mean, one of the things I think that I find interesting about this, and maybe we can tie it back to the Satanic Panic a little bit, because the radical sheen in in metal music is always a thing, and there are basically two ways to get it: politics and religion.
Evil.
And what's the scariest religion? Usually Satanism, although, there's some other scary, Odinist paganism.
A voodoo band is not going to scare anybody like, Satan.
Right. Although I did once listen to a Aztec folk metal band which talked about ripping people's hearts from their still beating bodies, so that was kind of cool. But to speak to you about Rage Against the Machine and the weirdness of this milieu, though, my exposure to Ruby Ridge and all that stuff and a lot of the right was actually through a email group that I would get on at school around Rage Against the Machine. It was like one of those early Google groups that we would just talk about Rage lyrics, but like a lot of anger at the government was actually somewhat sympathetic to like Timothy McVeigh. And in that stuff. So it's not surprising to me at all that even people who listen to the lyrics, who were just like, well, we're mad at the system, but they don't, what they think they should be mad at is completely different.
Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. I mean,
right, exactly.
Like, fuck you, mom.
And so I was like, I did remember it's a vivid memory to me, like people talking about Ruby Ridge in the Rage Against the Machine group that I would access at the library at my school, like, because I didn't have a computer at home. So it was very, very interesting thing to think about now. And the other thing about the satanic panic culture that I always found interesting is I think what killed it was the internet, but not because of the reason why you might think, but because we realized how silly a lot of this occult shit really was. Like, I'm somewhat serious about that, because there was a time, for example, where like all these pagan groups were blowing up on the internet in the early aughts, right? And you go and you meet them and you're like, oh, these are a bunch of weird ass boomers. like they're a bunch of fucking burnout hippies who like have a degree in magic or some shit. And some of that culture is messed up. I mean, like if you like look up what like Marion Zimmer Bradley's relationship to her daughter, like you can find, although she became an evangelical Christian, so take some of what she says with a grain of salt. But there really was some messed up stuff going on in that subculture. But what is interesting, it wasn't out of a satanic subculture. It was out of this like left permissiveness of the 70s subculture, like the idea that you needed to get rid. And this was something we forget. But there was a movement to like get rid of like age of consent laws because they were used against queer people and stuff like that. Like the removal of the distinction between adult and minor was part of a very small minority of the new left. And I do think it's stories about that led some credence to this, because not all of it was made up. Like most of it was made up, but not all of it. And then, as we were talking about, like the admission that child sexual abuse happened at all and it being admitted in culture, that wasn't something, yes, everyone knew it happened, but you never talked about that shit. Like, and someone in your community might handle it the old-fashioned way. Like someone might go and like beat the shit out of someone's dad if it got out in the community, but they didn't talk about it at all. Like not directly anyway, and definitely not on media.
Plus we get all these books that go Bastard Out of Carolina, Color Purple. And these come out much, much later, even though they may be talking about the 40s, 20s, turn of the century. Doesn't matter the time frame they're talking about. When these books come out is so much later down the road, because that's when these topics become more popular. And again, it's a time when these people are going to therapy for the first time, and we can't downplay the role that therapy plays in this. And this is the question, and I asked this to you, Kenzo, first. QAnon has had a resurgence. And some of the same scare tactics that we see with the satanic panic, a fear of child endangerment. Now, with a widening war on abortion, gay rights, and trans rights, the winning strategy for religious right seems to be the fear of child indoctrination. Protecting the innocent, those who we see as weak has always been a bipartisan tactic to get mass appeal for bills to pass that might be somewhat controversial. Remember the 1994 crime bill is still touted as a success by its Democratic sponsors, people like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, because of the Violence Against Women Act provision that was in the 94 crime bill.
I mean, we can also talk about the third wave feminists explicitly siding with evangelicals around pornography too, if you want to. I'm going to feed it to Kenzo, but it was that was a thing. Like,
yeah. At that, yeah, I it's again like one of those things where there is a problem here, like, but the people are using this moral panic to obfuscate the actual issue at hand. Like, that movie that just came out, The Sound of Freedom, people behind the movie are, child sex abusers, allegedly. And but they are, touting being the defenders of children and the defenders of innocence. And one of the common threads I'm really seeing between the fear mongering around trafficking, the fear mongering around drag queens, is that it really is kind of a campaign to give to maintain the property, children as property. And a lot of this is about our children. What are we going to do about our children? And it's not really about protecting the children. It's about protecting the children from other people. Like, whatever happens in my house is fine. And you see it in every one of these cases where someone is so vehemently anti you're pro QAnon and supposedly anti child sex abuse. There's always something that they're trying to cover up, it seems.
Derek?
I mean, I don't need to bring up Dennis Hastert, do I? Or like the number of times this has happened. Matt Gaetz is another one. I mean, we could go on. I'm allegedly in the guest. I get. Is it allegedly? I don't know if it's actually allegedly in terms of Matt Gaetz, but it's true at Hastert, 100%. One of the things that you have to do, like who's anytime. I'm gonna say this, and this is gonna sound cynical. Anytime you have people with access to kids, including parents, you are going to have to be alert for sexual assault. One thing I will say, and I've never seen stats to like push back on this, 1 in 5 boys and 1 in 3 girls have been in some way sexually assaulted in their life. That's a stat I hear from the left and the right, and I've not seen a good countervailing thing about it. The question is, who do you think is doing it? And while one should never say never in regards to like marginalized groups, one has to be pretty honest about the odds, right? And it's almost always, even in the case of sexual assault of boys, it's almost always someone who you would identify as heterosexual, someone who's close to them, etc. I don't know. It's not always that, and you will find exceptions. And but what is the statistical average? The thing that we have to deal with is we don't have a good. I mean, I think one of the anxieties around all the satanic panic stuff in regards to children, I don't know, like in the larger culture, I think it's largely bullshit. But in regards to children, is it's a real anxiety about the breakdown of communal norms and public spaces that are shared where there's multiple adults who all kind of have an agreement on this. Now, I say that's a real anxiety and it's very real. It's not like there still isn't child abuse in traditional societies, as we've said. In fact, it's hard to know how much there is. So it's not that's a panacea to all your problems, but it does seem, to quote one of the most awful people on the planet, it does actually take a village to protect your children. You can't do it by yourself, and that's where a lot of these anxieties come from, because people know they can't do it by themselves, but they don't have another option. And where does that go? Into paranoid fantasies, etc., or into the wrong place. It's not that the threat isn't there, it's just it's not some Satan worshiper, cabal of people at a daycare. It's probably somebody in your child's life that like, and that's also hard to look at. To think that, like, the people are the people who are most likely to do this stuff. And I think there's that all that you tie that into the change, the end of women at the home, with like 50% of women entering the workforce. You tie that into the bourgeois family was really, as we understand it, the bourgeois nuclear family was really only allowed to working class people for about 60 years, but they start to lose it pretty quickly in the 70s. We see all this, and that's for good and ill. All these things, I think we have this tendency to want to say, oh, it's good, oh, it's bad. I think every one of these things we mentioned tonight, except for the satanic paranoia, which I do think is almost all bad, has multiple characters at once, and we have to deal with that. And one thing I think when we talk about this, when we don't deal with it as this multifaceted phenomenon where there's all these crazy feedback loops and all these cultural narratives and stuff, because I wouldn't want to censor Rosemary's Baby so we didn't have the satanic panic, and that's on top of me hating Roman Polanski. But it's like a thing that I think about all the time. And even that, like, Rosemary's Baby is an actively feminist work made by a person that was a rapist. Like,
was he a rapist later in life after that, or was he always?
It was after it, because his wife, Sharon Tate, is still alive. But still, like, it's something that you kind of have to sit with. It wasn't that much after that. I think it's like 5 years after that was made.
In the 70s. I know when he did it.
Yeah.
And then he was accused again by she was in The Golden Child, the really, really hot woman in The Golden Child.
I don't know her name, but I know who.
Charlotte Lewis. Charlotte Lewis.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know her name, but if she walked in here right now, I would just end the stream. I want the knife. Please. We should watch The Golden Child for movie night. For TIR movie night, I'm sure.
That's a Eddie Murphy deep cut, I guess.
Yeah, that and Best Defense are like Eddie Murphy deep cuts.
Golden Child, though, the bloody oatmeal scene, that was etched in my brain as a child. I couldn't eat oatmeal
to this day, Kenzo Shibata, to this day. And I can't buy cream of wheat in this freaking country. I don't know what AMLO did to the cream of wheat cartel, but I can only get
oatmeal. You can buy grits if you really try.
I feel like cream of wheat and grits are something I'm gonna have to get, like, knocking on the same door where I get like cocaine and sex slaves. Like, no, I'm here for the cream of wheat.
Yeah, well, cream of wheat, you are gonna probably have to do that. Grits, you can just buy hominy and grind it, I suppose.
That is way too much work for a lazy black person like myself. I don't know what kind of Atlanta shit you're trying to pull on me. Like, back in my day in Macon. Mama Vaughn used to grind the hominy.
Oh man, I like how you're making my me to sound like a fucking Song of the South character, and I can't tell if it's a white one or a black one either.
I'm thinking of singing so many inappropriate things that I shouldn't do on the main show, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
I'm so old. We're all so old, but I remember seeing VHS copies of Song of the South still at video stores.
My little brother has it on VHS. There was a thing that came out called Disney Songs, and it was a VHS thing of all the Disney songs, and my brother used to watch Song of the South all the time.
I watched it in a Black Studies class, and when I was an undergrad, so I guess this was over 20 years ago. But even then, we had to smuggle a Betamax from Europe. It was still available in Europe in the aughts.
Oh,
Like
wow.
you just had to. It was on Betamax, but yeah, I mean it was funny, and I'm like, man, what's funny about it to me. Now Disney has cleaned up other things now too, but like at that time, Song of the South you couldn't see, but you could still see Dumbo.
Oh yeah,
And that has the Jim Crows in it.
but the
like,
thing about Song of the South, imagine. Okay, I didn't know this. You know, we had all heard the rumors about Disney having like pornographic images and stuff.
Mhm.
I finally heard the real story. I can't remember if it was Dan Larson that told it or somebody else, that some animators were pissed over pay, and on the if you have the original big VHS box cover of Little Mermaid, they drew dicks all over the place. They drew dicks on the staff, just dicks. They were pissed. And it took a long time for Disney to figure that out, and they pulled it so that you can't find that cover anymore. I didn't know that artists do shit like that when they're mad. And my tattoo artist was working at a different shop when she lived in the Bay Area, and an artist that was leaving had tattooed dicks on everybody. Like if a woman wanted a flower, he'd make the flower, but then, you know, because sometimes you can't. If you see a picture of a tattoo right after it's done, show me after it's healed. Right? That's how we know if it's a really good job. And this guy he was actually a really good artist too, and he was just putting dicks on everybody's shit. Memorial tattoos for dead relatives, just dicks. I had no idea that Disney had dicks all over the fucking Little Mermaid. So if you have the original VHS, that big box, you know which one I'm talking about. You gotta open it, and you probably cut your hand on it several times. There's dicks all over the place on that one. But imagine, you know, that conversation with the CEO about pulling Song of the South. I'm sure he's like, Song of the what? What? I don't know anything about you talking about. Racist? What?
I mean, it is funny that Splash Mountain was still based off Song of the South until like relatively recently. Yes, they didn't change that. It was still there. And so like nobody knew.
Don't worry, them people can't swim. They'll never ride this.
It's like that whole thing about crashing into a briar patch, like it's in there. Like, God, I watched that in school as a kid. You can tell I'm from Georgia.
You did a lot of things in Georgia you weren't supposed to do.
Well, yeah, well, true, but I can't say that on air. Never mind. There's a reason why, as a non-Christian, I used to go to Baptist lock-ins. I'll just put it that way. So Jason's going to ponder that for a minute. But you never been to a lock-in? Did they not do that where you guys are from?
I know that it is
like some strictly Southern, you know.
That you lock a bunch of teenagers in a church and leave them under the care of a youth pastor, and it's like 100 people, and you stay up all night.
Like a group molestation.
It's something. It's something. I would say it is somewhere between that and starts with an O and ends with a Y. So like,
why did it take me? That's like one of those like don't be gay camps. Like the guy that's doing it is just, yes, send your child here. And they're like,
I mean, it is interesting because there was a whole stuff about the lock-ins. One of the purposes was like pledge yourself to chastity, and I'm like, oh, this is funny. But anyway, I mean, these are the things of a childhood in the South. It's
you
like,
know who makes a joke of that? Have you ever seen the Mr. Show sketch where David Cross plays the gay convert to heterosexuality, but he keeps always backsliding back to homosexuality? What they call it, homosensuality. Every year he has a different.
Almost everything David Cross does hits too close to home because he was a Jew in Atlanta. And am an ethnically ambiguous Jew in Macon, which is 2 hours south. But every time that he talked, I was like, man, that feels too
Y'all's
real.
people eat oatmeal. Dude,
all 5 of us,
dude,
including David Cross.
I was literally watching that the other night, like 2 nights ago, and I was in tears laughing 30 years later, damn near, because it's so. I had a. Well, I won't get into the particulars, but family member almost went to one of those places, and they're real. They just every time he would tell me the story about it, I was like, that just feels uncomfortable, man. It feels like wherever you're going ain't right. Just stay home.
Man, everything Mr. Show is pretty hilarious. My favorite skit, to tie it back onto this, was the Satan and Catholic Church collaboration to get people to stop being atheists. Like, it was like believe in anything, and it was like Bob Odenkirk and an Anton LaVey beard, and like David Cross is a priest, I think.
The Hail Satan Network skit that they do at their last season is still the best. I wish we were in the champagne room and I could play that right now, because I think we would all have a damn good time giggling at that. Kenzo, you are not a Satanist.
Not currently, no. Never been. So if it does happen, it'll be in the future.
Would you ever be one just to say you're one?
It's not cool anymore, so no.
Just to like speak up when people like as a Satanist. Just
like in a public comment section part of a city council meeting. Like as a Satanist.
just being a dick like at cafes. As a Satanist.
As a Satanist of color, I believe.
As a Satanist of color, yeah. You should say it's the Satanist of color. This latte sucks, and then just throw it in the face.
I just realized that Satanist of color is like sock.
Bisock.
Black Indigenous Satanist of color.
You know what? I didn't know what BIPOC was. I thought it was a bi person of color.
Well, the first few times I saw it, that's what I thought too.
Okay, so I'm not okay, so I don't feel so bad.
Because in the context, like this person would be talking about a bi person of color as well.
I was like, man, you needed a name for that? I was like, you guys are getting real down to the specifics.
That's a whole nother conversation. But you want to talk about like nomenclature changing overnight? That went from like I only saw it in academic papers in like 2019, and then it was
everywhere,
used everywhere by 2020.
And I had to learn what it meant.
Whereas like it used to, like, how long did we call people African Americans? Like, I think it was 20 fucking years, and that was always kind of dumb. Like, I remember at one point somebody was like, well, you're a European American, and I'm like, no, actually half my ancestors are from North Africa, motherfucker. I don't know what you're talking about. Like,
and I never got the paperwork for the change. Like, I figured that there was going to be some sort of like meeting.
I never got my Jew gold either, so me and Kenzo are both old Jew gold, so never mind. I shouldn't say that in front of the goyim. But
so before we go, because this show is definitely getting demonetized. So the Saturday show, Norm Finkelstein shows up and he wants to play us this Paul Robeson Negro spiritual, which I thought was sweet and also rather hilarious. And
I just was quiet.
I was just like, sounds about right. That was a copy. We got a copyright strike on that. They didn't pull it. The show still, they didn't pull it, thank God. But doesn't matter how many views it gets. What was your favorite go-to metal album and horror movie during this moment in your life?
Oh God, that's tough.
82 to I'll give you 82 to 88. I'll give you 82 to 88.
Okay, so I was a kid. All right. Kenzo, you want to go first? Or you want me to go
I'm
first?
thinking Nightmare on Elm Street 2 for the movie.
Ooh, I love 2.
Because that one was just such a it was very different from any other
Mhm.
slasher at the time. And you had this like, I mean, it was about being gay. It was about being in the closet,
Yes.
like that. Even the writer came out later, pretty recently, and said that that's what it was. But at the time, I just knew that they had this like creepiness to it that the other
Mhm.
ones didn't quite have, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Metal song, that's going to be a hard one.
So for me, what Kenzo's thinking about his metal song, mine is actually Nightmare on Elm Street 3
Mhm.
or The Exorcist. Those were my two favorite movies as a kid. So it's either Dream Child or The Exorcist. I didn't see 2 until way later. I don't think I'd seen 2 in '89. I think I saw that like as an older teenager. Because I think it would have been. I think when I even watched that one as a teen, I thought it was really more creepy than the other ones. My favorite metal album at that time, you're gonna laugh, but it was Queensryche. I
The
really
Queen of the
like
Reich?
Queensryche. Queensryche. You
Yeah,
remember
Queen of the
Queensryche?
Reich. The Queen of the Reich. I definitely can't
Yeah,
hit those notes.
but I mean, it
He's
was like
from the singer's
like
from Louisiana. He's from the South. Did you know that? He's from Shreveport.
no, I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
just knew that I really was into. I didn't realize I was into prog metal, but I was apparently into prog metal as a child.
Or you mean
Like,
Operation Mindcrime?
yes.
Operation Mindcrime is one of the dopest concept albums in the history of concept albums.
And I think if you'd extended it to 91, it would have been Faith No More. But because I fell in love with Faith No More like right before grunge broke. So
yeah, Faith No More was a Faith No More and Bjork were game changers for me musically, still are to this day.
I mentioned Bjork on my other show.
They're game changers. Those are the most fearless groups of people that just do whatever they feel whenever they feel. I mean, Faith No More comes back after I forget how many years of being gone. They're playing this huge festival. A friend of mine was at I know Faith No More as well, but a friend of mine was at the festival as well, and he said we were side stage. There was, probably 1,000 people side stage watching Faith No More walk on stage. And what does Faith No More do? Reunited. They do Reunited. They don't do a heavy version of it. They do the actual Reunited. Feels so good. Like that's when you come out like that.
Yeah,
another level.
Man, Mike Patton. People are screaming Phantasm. Unfortunately, I didn't see Phantasm yet. I know it was around, but I don't think I'd seen it in '88. I had to limit myself to what I'd actually seen. I was trying to be honest on this one. So, yep. What about you, Jason? And then we'll get to Kenzo's metal album from '88.
Yeah, I love the fact that he's really pondering it. Mine was a mix of Nightmare 2 because it was on cable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that too.
That and Friday, is it 5 with Corey Feldman?
Is that the end of the Good Fridays?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think it's like 1, 2, 3. I don't remember 4. I mean 5. I remember being good, and then after that,
maybe it's 4. Like, maybe 4 is.
What's the one where he goes to New York? It's stupid.
Oh God.
Oh, Jason Takes Manhattan.
8.
Yeah, it's 8. Yeah, that's when we're off the. That's when we're way jumped the shark.
Oh yeah. Dude.
But
I could watch Nightmare 2, Phantasm 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because it had boobs in the first scene, and that's for a young 10-year-old
pre-internet, that was
deal. Huge right there. It's like it turns into the tall man, and then I was all confused about myself, but that doesn't matter.
Oh,
it's a spectrum, people. It's a spectrum.
Angus Grimm is a disturbing looking individual, but
I went to go rent The Toxic Avenger. And then my mom, I've said this before on the show, my mom recorded a movie and gave it to me. She recorded it. She saw it and hit record on the VCR and said, "You have to watch this." I still don't believe what I saw. And that movie was called Street Trash.
Oh,
My mom
Okay,
gave me
I've
Street
never seen
Trash when I
this.
was 11 years old.
wow.
Street
That sounds
Trash has
bad.
a scene in it, Derek, where a dude gets his penis cut off, and it's a bunch of homeless people in like a junkyard, and he gets his penis cut off in the junkyard, and everyone starts playing keep away with it, and he eventually gets it back, and then tries to like hail a cab with it, and then jumps on a school bus with his.
Okay, yeah, I thought the most metal thing that happened to me as a kid is I guess it was '88. My parents let me watch Full Metal Jacket.
That's
was
equally
apparently
frightening, dude. Again, I watched it. My dad was one of those people that's like, yeah, let's just watch this movie. It's not porn, so it's okay for a child. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That to me is like 80s parenting back then. Like, oh, as long as it's not in that special room, it's okay for the kids. So I
remember watching the Police Academy films long before I understood what sex was.
Oh yeah, Revenge of the Nerds. Which,
yeah.
God, can't believe they let me watch Revenge of the Nerds when I was like 6.
Is not a movie I would show my 9-year-old. But I watched it with my dad, and my dad looked over at me, and I looked over at him. I was like, I guess it's okay.
That's like if your dad watched Ski School movies with you or something. That sounds pretty innocent, but we all know what those movies actually are.
Like, there was
if you don't, children, you are too young.
The curated experience of watching movies on a cable network for me was bliss, and I miss made-for-TV movies starring actors from TV shows that I liked. Like if Meredith Baxter Birney or Nancy, what is her name? Nancy McKeon was in a movie. If Valerie Bertinelli, if those people were in it,
oh fuck yeah, Valerie.
Oh my god, I'm watching it. I'm watching it every time. I found out Amazon has all those made-for-TV movies, by the way.
Oh, really?
Come on. Yes. Oh yes. We should have a watch party of that.
So, did you guys ever watch Up All Night with Gilbert Gottfried or Rhonda Radner? Which a lot of that was just softcore porn edited with all the nudity. It's just the most bizarre shit.
Just the plot of soft porn.
I think I watched like Cage Heat 2, but like all the scenes were cut out. So you're just like, I feel like something salacious is going on, but I don't know what.
Dude, someone says so many wet T-shirts in Police Academy.
They really are, actually. In
Police Academy was just. I watched Police Academy to no end. Like a typical Friday night for can't go out adolescent Jason was probably a Police Academy movie on cable. There was going to be an action movie, like an Andy Sedaris movie, like Hard Ticket to Hawaii, Picasso Trigger, one of those crazy ass Andy Sedaris movies. Definitely some sort of low budget, straight to cable horror movie. And then
maybe one of those Stephen King miniseries.
Oh,
I remember watching a lot of those.
Tommy Knockers. Is that one of them?
Yeah, Tommy Knockers, Langoliers. There were so many of them.
Someone's saying anything with Barbara Crampton, and to go to sleep, it was either going to be Motley Crue's "Too Fast for Love" record. I had a Jump in the Fire single, and
for me it was Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 by the time I was 12.
And it was like what's the Megadeth for Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? I had an auto reverse little alarm clock tape deck, so just those that was the soundtrack to go to sleep to, and those were the movies that I would watch, and then those metal records on repeat. So Kenzo, what are your metal records on repeat?
Bro, particularly to go back to the original question, I think the Satanic Panic era, anything Slayer but Rain and Blood would kind of come to the forefront there for me, because that was a record that actually did scare me when I first heard. Even I was saying how I'd laugh off all my friends who were afraid of the satanic imagery and everything, because like the cover was done, I don't want to say poorly, but it was it was in a style that was just not precise. It was just something about it that was just very creepy. And then,
it looked like a janky VHS cover, kind of.
Yeah, it's a good call. And then the lyrics themselves were like, everything else plausible deniability about Satanism, but that record that entered through the realm of Satan, like some amazing lines in there, and like it was something that genuinely scared me, so I liked it.
You know what the scariest record that I ever heard was back then? You're gonna laugh at me. You're gonna laugh at me, and I hope that someone gets this to Dave Mustaine. The first Megadeth record with the cover they hate, where there's literally pickles and ketchup on the bones, looked to me like a madman's basement because of all the horrible horror movies I saw. And that intro track, Last Rites, Love You to Death, to me sounded like the soundtrack to your murder. I don't hear that song from Silence of the Lambs from the serial killer. I hear Last Rites, Love to Death. And that's the basement that I'm in. And that's Buffalo Bill's house in Silence of the Lambs for me. Scariest thing ever. There's no metal band to me. I'd listen to all the Slayer stuff back then. It did not scare me as much as the first Megadeth record. I think because of the quality on that recording was so bad, and I thought Dave Mustaine was Satan.
Yeah, there's something about those early '80s like actual heavy metal records, because they are mixed terribly. That they're so muddy that it feels dark. Like, and yeah, almost like is there a good mix metal album before like 1988? I don't
Master
know.
Puppets.
Oh yeah, that's about it though.
No, you know, Peace Sells. Here, I'll name a few. You, Kenzo, stop me if I'm full of shit. What's the album before Persistence of Time? The Anthrax with the key.
State of Euphoria?
No, Steven, not that one. The one before that with I Am the Law and
Among the Living.
Among the Living.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good
Go
fucking
back
album
right now,
album.
Derek Farn, and listen to Among the Living, and you'll be like, "That's a damn good record."
No, it's great. I actually like tend to love Anthrax. Like I go back and listen to a lot of metal that I used to love in my early teens, like Biohazard. That guy ended up being a porn star, by the way. Biohazard and Anthrax and early Pantera.
So actually, Evan Seinfeld now, he has an Instagram, and his deal is he does male mentorship and coaching. It doesn't seem to be like a scam either. He like meets with groups of young men in Brooklyn, and they mentor each other.
So he went from, and following, I'm just going to tap out Evan Seinfeld's career about maybe this says something about the Satanic Panic. I don't know. Biohazard member, married to Tara Patrick, porn star, male mentor, and somehow he's not Andrew Tate. That's all I gotta say. That's all I gotta say.
Oh, and then there was Oz. He started on Oz.
He was in Oz. Speaking of Andrew Tate, I want you guys to tell me this is a good thing or not. I know we're going a little off topic. That's okay. The show's going long. This is the kind of stuff you get in the champagne room, guys. But anyway, there's some kid, he's a streamer, and he does that thing where he yells at people like incessantly, just yells at them. And he's a kid, he's like 18, small little brown child. I don't know what kind of brown he is. He's a little brown child, and he just yells at people. And he yelled at Andrew Tate, calling him all kind of bitches. He yelled at that guy, Adam, was it Adam 22 from the No Jumper podcast? He's like, your wife got trained by a black dude. And the guy, Adam was like, well, it was one black guy. I wouldn't call it a train. He's like, but it was a black guy. He had a big black dick and he fucked your wife. And so this kid is just yelling at these people. He's just being a real kind of a doucher, right? And apparently he got caught out in them streets. And some young colored gentleman knew who he was and beat the shit out of him. And it was like a scene from an 80s movie. And every time the kid would start to get upset, they'd grab him and he'd be like, okay, I'm a bitch, okay. And so I was like, this is horrible. And they live streamed it, and they're like, I don't know if they live streamed beating his ass, but they definitely, his shirt was just ripped off of him. They were wearing his glass. It was really embarrassing. It was really, really sad. And the kid then apologizes on the stream. He's like, this has been the worst week of my life. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm so sad. And you know who reached out to him? Andrew Tate reached out to him and said, I'm going to teach you how to fight. Does that make Andrew Tate a decent human being?
No, but I mean, you know, I guess we could all teach people how to fight. Maybe that should be like when we decide to leave left podcasting, we could just start a fight club show. Like,
I am not against people learning how to. I taught my daughter how to throw combinations when she was 6.
you should, God, particularly a girl. Like you should teach a girl how to rip someone's spine out their back.
She also knows how to catch properly, which is really funny. Whenever I see her, like, "Hey, ball!" Like, that's why she's junior. But is the kid was like, I guess, and he yelled at Andrew Tate. He yelled at Andrew Tate. He's like, "You think you're so good? You're a rapist. You're a rapist piece of shit." And you know, Andrew Tate then reached out to the kid. I guess he's got a massive following, and was like, "Hey man, this is unacceptable. Like, you can't be walking around here and getting beat up like this and made fun of on the internet. I'm gonna take you aside and teach you how to fight." I don't follow Andrew Tate, so I don't know if his time in prison has calmed him down. I doubt it.
Maybe it's calmed down what he's willing to show. But...
Someone says Tate is grooming.
Man. Almost. Wow.
Maybe that does feed into this what this show's about.
All of a sudden, we have Tate-anon.
Someone says Andrew Tate was influenced by Cobra Kai. Does this Andrew Tate's positive Johnny turn? Like, doesn't that make Cobra Kai the greatest thing for people of our generation? The story of Johnny in the first season. I haven't followed it since the first 2 seasons.
I watched the first season and I thought it was great, and then I kind of got bored. Like, but,
nostalgia overload.
Yeah, you know, the 80s, I mean, we're talking about it, but the 80s was actually a really shitty time for me. So, like, and so was the 90s. And my life got better when I was an adult. So it's definitely one of those things. Although I really do, my music is so formed by early like heavy metal. So we haven't talked about this, and I'm just going to really throw as a topic, because the other stuff I listened to was early Dirty South rap, like Crisscross and stuff like that from Atlanta, because it was local. So like my first records are like Megadeth, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, and then it's also like Crisscross, Two Live Crew. That's not Southern, but I think it's Florida. That's God, all this like, it was, what's that label out of Atlanta that was
LaFace?
LaFace. It was all this LaFace stuff, basically.
Goody Mob.
It wasn't, yeah. And so that was what I grew up listening to, was like that, and then everybody listened to 50s music also when I was a kid. So that was it.
Dude,
it was,
what town did you grow up in? They're locking you into the fucking preacher orgy.
Oh God! No. See, that's what you guys don't know. You tell people to focus on their virginity all the time. What are you telling them to do? Think about sex constantly. Like, constantly. As a non-Christian, we used to go to these things because, like, frankly, Baptists were easy. So, you know, like, it was, because you're constantly telling them, like, wait till marriage, wait till marriage, wait till marriage. It's constantly putting the idea in their fucking head.
Derek's testicles are like this big. They're like these massive things. He's like, can I get married now? You're 14, son.
Oh man. You laugh. One of my brothers got married at 15. That's all I gotta say.
Legal age of consent. Where Varney's from, it's like this tall. It's like a height requirement. It's like,
God damn. I do believe that actually the age of marriage consent was 14 in Georgia at the time. The age of sexual consent was higher than that, and I was always trying to figure out how the fuck that worked. But yeah, Georgia was a messed up place. You shouldn't have lived there in the 80s. Like, it's just it's just as bad. Like, it's just bad. Chicago, much more wholesome. Like,
apparently, the dirty South is real. That fucking moniker fits.
Well, there's nothing else to do.
Mhm.
I mean, you go to church, like there's not even, this pre-internet, so there's not even like people staying at home and trying to get on Pornhub or whatever the kids do now. And so like I remember there was constantly like STI outbreaks because like there's nothing to fucking do. Like, so like it's like, oh well, an entire town got gonorrhea. Like, so
it's all Varn's fault, walking around slinking around in his Jinkos.
I could not afford Jinkos. You know what's funny about that? I was too poor for fucking Jinkos. But I did try to mimic them by going to the Goodwill and buying size 55 pants and just like
and then put a belt on.
And then I think we've all done that. I think we all.
And then I couldn't afford a chain wallet, so I took like a dog chain.
Oh, high five! Yeah. High five! I did the same thing.
Or you can go to the hardware store and just buy a certain amount of length of chain and do the same thing.
Yeah, I did that later when I got a little older. But like when I was like real young, I was like, we have a dog. I can do this.
I didn't do the chain wallet. There was no Hot Topic. So it was like you had to go to Berkeley and go to like the bondage store and get that kind of stuff. That was expensive at the bondage. And it's weird to walk in there like 14, 15 years old. Like, oh, can I get the belt with the studs?
Yeah, that was the same thing. To get that shit before Hot Topic opened, you had to go to Little 5 Points in Atlanta, and yet you would have to go to the bondage store. Like it was, even though I don't think I knew that's what it was. I was like the place with the weird leather clothes. Like, but yeah, this is why we're so fucked up, Jay. Like I don't think people understand why Gen Xers are so fucking weird. Like it's just like
JB says, no way in hell I was ever wearing Jinkos back in the day. I got my pair of Jinkos. I had a job. I worked at my high school, and I got them from Ross. Did they have Ross where you guys were from?
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
So yeah, I had the Ross Jinkos, which are probably worse than the department.
Well, they weren't worse. You just had to like wait till they went on sale.
I remember,
they had to have like a defect or something.
Varn, I remember vividly saving those little bitty paychecks and paying $19.99. It was like $21.83 plus tax,
which is like $85 in today's money. I don't think I'm joking about that. But Jinkos. Luckily I got into goth fashion around that time, which was easier to buy at the thrift store. So yeah.
Kenzo, did you have Jinkos?
Did you have Jinkos?
I didn't specifically have Jinkos, but I definitely did wear very baggy pants, like sagging low with a big shirt. So you can just, now the kids will just have their underwear ass just hanging out of their pants. Like we always made sure that the shirt was like long enough.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to see all that.
No, that's why I would buy like XXX size shirts because like it would go to your knees. I remember also back when crisscross was a thing. I guess I was a freshman in high school and we tried to wear our clothes backwards. So
I did that. I'm not gonna lie, I did that freshman year.
So we all did that shit.
I saw a kid. I remember this was like, oh god, I don't remember how many years ago. It was maybe like 8 years ago. I remember I was on a BART train, which is like the subway we have here in the Bay Area. And so kids sag in skinny jeans, which I think is just weird. And like Kenzo's saying, they don't wear the extra long, tall tees that we wore. So this kid is sagging below his boxer briefs. Again, we were sag. I'm not trying to say like we were better. It's just different. It's just not better. It's just different. This kid had, of course, some kind of like brief on, so it's a little more fitting, and his fucking hog is hanging over the jeans, looking like Gonzo's nose, and he's standing waiting for the train door to open. And I just started laughing. I looked at him and I couldn't stop laughing. My ex was with me at the time, and she's cracking the fuck up. She was the one that called it Gonzo's nose. And the dude looked over at us, and he could tell that we were laughing at him.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing to do when your whole hog is hanging out, right? Because what are you going to stretch it out to make it look longer? Like there's nothing you can do at that point. Because you're trying to act like you don't know why we're laughing at you. So he just stood there kind of in shock. And I was like, yeah, dude, hog.
Oh, man. Kenzo, do you have long hair in high school?
I did. I had long hair middle school and high school.
I had long. So this is funny. So my hair is what it is, which it takes on the likeness of. Oh boy, it takes off the likeness of many ethnicities. But I had long hair until 1995 when I got a comb stuck in it and I couldn't get it out. And then I had to cut my bangs off, and I had a mullet, and I was like, no. So then I shaved all my hair off and dyed it red. But
yeah, I did a few things. I had long, and then from there that became a mohawk. And that became the Misfits Devil Lock, which I didn't keep for very long.
So did you do a proper mohawk, like with the wood glue, like they used to do, like in the 80s, or did you do it like with the stuff from Sally's?
Stuff from Sally's.
Okay, but that's fair.
Yeah.
I wasn't brave enough to do the wood glue either. I did try to do the whole Kool-Aid dye your hair thing. That doesn't actually work, but I sure fuck tried it. So
just had ants all over your
just like fucking sugar everywhere. You're just gonna. No, I was in Georgia. I'd have been mobbed by fucking flying cockroaches. Like. And we killed Jason. Even though you're now the host.
Embarrassing fashion is coming back. A good friend of mine who has a teenage son. His son had on an outfit, and his daughter, he has a teenage son and the daughter going to junior high. And, everybody's got the pictures of the kids going to school. And I thought it was hilarious because I was like, dude, your kids look like how we looked in high school. He's like, yes. He goes, my son wants baggier pants. Like he sees pictures of me. He's like, I want baggier pants than dad. It's like, is that the thing?
I've been reading for the night because we've had several 80s revivals since I became an adult. Like it's happened multiple times. Like I remember when I was a teacher and I must have been like 28 years old, and then all these students I have, they were all into like Soldier Boy, but they were all also wearing leg warmers, and I was like, what the fuck? But I've been waiting for the worst parts of the 90s to come back. We've already done our defensive new metal, so we've gotten we're the vanguard on that. So now, and I've been hearing that Jinkos are coming back.
I hope not. Don't let them.
I don't know.
I mean, I hope it doesn't.
Because people our age aren't going to be wearing Jankos as much as we feel nostalgic for it. I don't know if kids are going to get into that, though.
Cross colors, don't come back.
Jinkos Los Angeles is a thing. Hypercolor, was that come back? Is that going to come back? Your shirt changes color and it gets stuck there?
No, because of Me Too. You can't bring back clothes that you have to touch.
Okay, we are not just demonetized. We are now demonetized and canceled, and it's Kenzo's fault.
Of all people that would ever get the show canceled, Kenzo Shibata was not on the bingo card.
I figured it was going to be Norm by accident. Like, I wouldn't even meaning to be scandalous.
And then Kenzo goes, "Oh, hold my beer." Actually, no, Kenzo goes, "Hold this White Claw." I'm gonna buy you guys
Or
all
in your case,
Zimas.
it's going to be like a diet soda or whatever. What do you don't drink alcohol? I know, but what do you drink?
Kenzo
Like,
drinks.
no, not you. You.
No,
I know.
no, the black one. I don't. And right now, I stopped drinking soda because I had a goal for my birthday show to be like slim enough to just do it in the denim vest.
And you like me, you're not willing to give yourself like rat cancer to not drink sugar. So,
no. So I right now I'm literally only drinking water, and it's been very, very difficult for me as a huge fan of, as a connoisseur, as you know, Varn and Kenzo, of soda that I am.
Yeah, we are soda drinkers. I'm not a teetotaler, but I'm like a teetotaler 9 out of 10 days, and so yeah.
I'm even cutting back on my coffee consumption.
Oh, do you hate life?
We're old, dude, and all these things are like starting to catch up. I'm like, I got acid reflux.
Okay, yeah, but like you're also old. How are you gonna like get stuff moving?
Dude, I gotta get up and like imagine a Sylvester Stallone training montage in my head. Because I had a guest here. I had a guest in my house for a while. Female guest, and I was my acid reflux was so bad, I was like projectile vomiting.
Oh, that's sad. No, you should just drink water.
So yeah, I gotta get up different ways. I have to.
You would have to have a very special date, and not one that I think you'd want.
One of the people from the Baptist lock-in.
Do you know how many strippers I knew named Patience or Chastity? Like that's. They probably went to the Pentecostal church down the street. That's all I'm going to say. And that was not their stage name. That was their given name.
That's even worse.
Don't name kids after virtues. It never goes well. So
that's interesting.
I gotta head out now.
Okay, it is getting late. We've been talking for 2 hours. Kenzo, thank you very much for hanging out with us. Derek Varn, thank you for hanging out with us. We will be back tomorrow to talk about what's going on in Texas with David Griscom, John Salazar. Kenzo, where can people find you?
You can go to my Substack, classtime.substack.com. That's really the only thing I'm plugging these days.
I follow Kenzo's Substack. Kenzo and Derek are actually 2 teachers, public school teachers that are actually, Kenzo is very active on the Substack. I wanted to originally bring you on about something you had written about abuse. So we got to bring you back to talk about that. Derek Varn, people know where to find you because you are part of the TIR family. So
Yep. And I released something like 3 videos a week or something insane like that.
Yeah, you got a real popular one with the guy Colin Drum.
Yeah. My friend Colin's a friend of mine, but yeah, Colin Drum. I think he's the second most popular person who's been on my show other than Matt Christman. And then whenever Christman shows up, your numbers are crazy. But
gonna go up. He's like a leftist Elvis. Thank you guys very much, and we are out.